Hi, and welcome to Talking Philosophy. Today I want to talk about the history of philosophy and that premier figure of ancient philosophy, Socrates. Why is Socrates so often referred to? Why do people make so much of him? I'm going to try and explain it. First of all, you need to know that Socrates wrote nothing, just like Jesus and Buddha, not a word. He wasn't illiterate. He was accused by the comic playwrights, for some reason, that helping Euripides to write his tragedies. Uh, Never have found out why anybody accused him of that, but it is true. He's accused on several occasions, and by the comic playwrights. Um, didn't write a word. Everything we know that's attributed to Socrates comes from one of three sources. One of those comic playwrights, Aristophanes, who makes fun of him in several plays, most famously The Clouds. That's the one where Socrates is a major character. The others, he's just a sort of a sideline character. And he portrays Socrates as a blowhard know-it-all that bugs the crap out of everybody. There's Xenophon. Xenophon had been his commander in the army. He had also been kind of a student. Xenophon was a historian and wrote several books, and Socrates appears in several of them. And then, of course, there's Plato. Plato was his student. But it's clear, while Plato may have started out trying to express Socrates' actual thoughts, after a point, it turns over to all Plato all the time. And so we really can't know for sure just what Socrates actually said by going to Plato. And I think that's part of the reason for his attractiveness. Just like Jesus and Buddha, even though other people wrote about them and purported to be their students and give you their story, the fact is we don't know what Socrates said. So we can kind of make Socrates into whatever we want to. And I mean, there's limits, just as there are for those other two fellas. But in general, Socrates can be anybody's hero because we don't have any notion of what he actually said. So there's thing one why I think Socrates is interesting and important. Secondly, there's the oracle. The Delphic oracle was visited by several of Socrates' Athenian friends. They came to ask, who is wiser than Socrates? By this time, he's been asking questions. Xenophon said of him that he was the only person he knew that spent more time asking people what they knew than telling them what he knew. And of course, that's part of the Socratic method. You teach people by asking them questions. So anyway, they went to ask, he had such a reputation for being such a clever fellow, so wise, so clever. They went to the oracle to ask, is there anyone wiser than Socrates? Traditionally, the oracle answers in a very ambiguous way. When Mithridates wanted to invade Persia, he was king of Lydia. They sent a group off to the oracle and asked the oracle, if Lydia invades Persia, who will win? And the oracle is supposed to have replied, if Lydia invades Persia, a mighty kingdom will fall. Well, yeah, duh, they were both mighty kingdoms, so one lost or the other. One was going to fall, and it turns out, of course, it was Lydia. So that's the kind of ambiguity people are used to getting from the oracle. But when Socrates' friends asked who is wiser than Socrates, the reply came, no one. So they went back to Athens and said, well, no one's wiser than Socrates. He's the wisest of all men. Now, Socrates said, if I'm the wisest of all men, it's only because I know that I know nothing. Now, to me, that's awfully cynical. In fact, we could conclude that Socrates knows no more than anyone else. When we say that no one is wiser than Socrates, it doesn't mean there aren't people as wise as Socrates. In fact, everyone could be as wise as Socrates, just no one is wiser. So it's not as big a deal as it sounds. Nevertheless, Socrates used it as a license to go on bugging people and making a thorough nuisance of himself. So there's the oracle. That brings us to what we might call Socrates' passion. We have the trial, we have the imprisonment, and then we have the death. Um, he gets no resurrection. Sorry, folks. The trial. Three men, Meletus, Anytus, and Lycon, bring charges against Socrates that he is guilty of corrupting the youth, not worshiping the city's gods, and making the worse seem the better cause. At that last charge, Socrates says, Aristophanes is involved. As you can see, Aristophanes did charge him with that during his portrayal of Socrates in the plays. Socrates attacks that first, or defends himself against that first, saying, no, that's other people. I don't do that. I'm not saying there aren't philosophers that don't do it. In fact, there's a whole class of them. They're referred to as sophists. But he says, not me. I'm not that man. When it comes to the city's gods, he admits he's not as involved in public worship as others are, but that he has his own god, a voice that speaks to him inside, a demon, and the demon tells him when to be involved with this and when to be involved with that. Well, that's not really true. The demon doesn't say that so much as he says to Socrates, no, when he's going wrong. So that he takes, whenever he does something and the demon doesn't say no, then the demon approves. What all that means, I don't know. But I do know that he was trying to defend himself against atheism more than anything else. The fellow who may or may not have been his teacher, Anaxagoras, was run out of Athens because he was an atheist. I'm pretty sure he was, in fact, put to death for it, but I have to look that up, and I'm not about to waste time. Now, on the matter of corrupting the youth, Socrates said, no, I just ask questions. The youth hang around me. I don't make any effort to deal with them. But that's not quite true. As I.F. Stone points out in his book, The Trial of Socrates, there had been, and I've already mentioned them, two uprisings, two revolutions, two coups d'etats that have taken place in the last several years before Socrates' trial. And each of them had been led by Socrates' students, one by Crito and one by Alcibiades. In both cases, the students were among Socrates' favorites. In fact, Alcibiades and Socrates may or may not have had an affair. The story goes Alcibiades kept trying to get Socrates and got nowhere. So let's believe that story. Makes our progress simpler. But under any circumstances, he was involved in these people's education. He was, to a minor fringe level, involved in the operation of the governments of both of these overthrows. Socrates' hands aren't as clean as all that. And in fact, the jury of 500 finds him guilty. Now, it's not a huge difference. It's around, I could look it up, but I'm not going to again. It's around 270 to 230, okay? But there's a gap, and it's a significant gap, and they find Socrates guilty. Now, at this point, they turn to the accusers and say, what do you think Socrates' sentence should be? And they say, we believe Socrates should be put to death. Oop. Socrates now is asked, well, what do you think should be the sentence? Now, this is the tradition. Had Socrates come up with any sentence that seemed more appropriate than death, he might have gotten off entirely, or at least gotten off with a slap on the wrist. But Socrates suggests that he doesn't deserve any punishment at all, that he's in fact a hero of the city, that he makes the city as great as it is, and it wouldn't be half of what it was if he wasn't there bugging them all the time. So he first suggests that he should be given some money and put up in the city's temples like the Olympic heroes are. But in the end, he settles for a lesser sum on an annual basis. Well, this really doesn't fly, and it's one-sided that he goes to death. So he leaves on house arrest. They put a guard outside the house. His friend Crito, who had led one of the revolutions, comes over and says, Socrates, I have paid off the guard. Get your family, we're getting out of town. Socrates says, no, I'm not going anywhere. I obeyed the laws of the city. It made me life here, a safe life, a good life. It guaranteed me freedom from theft and from murder and beatings. And to turn my back on the law now would be wrong. And running would be turning my back on the law. No, I will stay and accept the sentence. That's all told in a dialogue called the Crito. Now then, Plato tells the story in the Phaedo. Mind you, in the story of the Phaedo, Plato himself makes it clear that he was not there for what he is about to report. They all believed Plato would be too big an emotional mess, and so sent him away. Right, back to the story of the Phaedo. In the Phaedo, the executioner brings the hemlock in the wine. Socrates says, what's going to happen? And he says, well, you drink it, you walk around a little bit, your body will start to feel heavy. When it does, lay down, and it'll kill you in pretty short order. So people are very upset, and they say, Socrates, don't do this thing. We can still get you out of here. And he says, no. He says, look, friends, one of two things is true. Either what we've always been told is true, and I will go into the Elysian fields, and I will see all the great heroes of the past and all the great wise men of the past, and I'll be able to ask them all the questions that I've always wanted to ask. And I'll go right on asking questions forever, and I'll go right on learning, and I'll go right on teaching. And what more can you ask than that? On the other hand, if I'm wrong, then I'm going to sleep. And who doesn't think that the best night of sleep they ever had is the one in which they were not interrupted? They just slept all night long. Well, death is that sleep that is never interrupted. At this point, he drinks the wine. He lay down. The story goes that the coldness starts at his feet, creeps up to his knees, up to his hips, and when it reaches his chest, he's supposed to have said to Crito, remember, I owe a cock to Aesculapius. Now, Aesculapius was the Greek god of healing. So it could have been that there had been a recent illness in the family and the proper offering had not been given to Aesculapius for the healing. It could be that the release from this world is the end of an illness, that this is a bad world, a difficult world, a world where he's in the end been sort of rejected by the city he loves so much. So in that regard, he may be saying that that's the illness. I'm being relieved of that suffering. However, Nietzsche suggests that perhaps what Socrates thought that life itself was really an illness, that he was really a decadent who could not deal with life and therefore was pleased to get out of life, period, that life was an illness. And that brings us back to what we were saying about Socrates not having written anything. We don't know. We don't have any Socratic context to put that line into. All we know is he said it, or at least that's the way it's reported. Then he dies. A lot of people admire that. A lot of people think here is a man who stood for something. When the trial came, he stood by his beliefs. When he was convicted, he defended the rules of the city. When he was executed, he died with dignity and with no sense that anything had been done wrong to him. And that's admirable in a lot of people's minds. So there you go. The passion of Socrates is another reason he's influential and important. His students are another reason. I'm going to be doing a series soon, The Sons of Socrates, where I'm going to recount how the great philosophies that shaped the life of ancients in the Mediterranean area for 1,000 years all come right through Socrates. All the founders of these traditions point back to Socrates as their founder, as their guide. So in that regard, Socrates is exceptional. But I do think that perhaps the biggest deal about Socrates is that he offers us a shift in what philosophy does. Before him, you get a lot of reportage. We hear what other places do, what other places think. We hear about how people act and how people behave. And some conclusions are drawn from that in terms of, which people are crazy and which people aren't, and what's true and what isn't. But Socrates isn't so much interested in what we know as how we know it. And he's not so much interested in what people actually do as what people should be doing. In that way, he is the most forward-looking of the early philosophers and sets the tone for the rest of the history of philosophy. The shame, I think, is that in the last 100 years or so, with a few exceptions, I mean, certainly John Dewey penetrates into that 100-year period I'm drawing. Bertrand Russell penetrates into it. Depending on how you feel about Noam Chomsky, whether he's a philosopher or not, penetrates into it. But so much of what philosophy was about in terms of helping people lead good lives, indeed, that's how I read the name philosophy, the love of wisdom. And what is wisdom? Wisdom isn't a body of knowledge. Otherwise, encyclopedias would be wise. Wisdom is knowing how to take knowledge and lead a good life with it. We've stopped defining what a good life is. We've stopped telling people how to lead a good life. Okay, I have no problem with that in one sense, because what do I know? I'm investigating and learning like everybody else. But there was a time, and Socrates marks the beginning of that time, where philosophers were able to say, here's what a good life is, and here's how you can lead it. All right. Well, that brings us to the end of today's talk. I hope you understand some of why people like Socrates so much. Have another talk coming up real soon. So you keep talking philosophy, and I'll keep talking philosophy. Please add any questions or comments you might have in the below. This is a way we can get engaged. You can offer suggestions for future talks. Anything you have to say, I'd love to hear it. Remember that this is available here, wherever you're looking at it now. It's also available in other places. The 3 locations are on Patreon at patreon.com/talkingphilosophy. I don't know the URL for YouTube, but if you go to YouTube and search Talking Philosophy, it should bring up my little talks here. And if you go to my Facebook page, that is the Talking Philosophy Facebook page, it's also posted there. Please share all this with anybody you think might enjoy it. Hope to see you again soon. So long.